Ever picture yourself like in a fighter jet? You're low on fuel, need to refuel midair. Now, imagine coordinating that whole thing, but with just a whiteboard.
Yeah.
Crazy, right? But that, unbelievably, was the reality for the military not that long ago.
Wow.
So today we are diving deep into Unit X, how the Pentagon and Silicon Valley can work together to win the wars of the future.
Oh.
It's written by Raj Shah. He's a former Pentagon official, also a tech entrepreneur with Chris Kirchhoff, who's a national security expert. And they take us behind the scenes to see how this small team is trying to drag the military into, well, the 21st century, technologically speaking, of course.
Right. Because it really highlights this critical issue, this struggle to keep up with how fast technology is moving. You kind of assume the military always has the best and newest stuff, but the reality is things change so fast, especially with, China and everything. There's a real urgency to this.
For sure. So picture this. It's 2015. Ash Carter takes over as Secretary of Defense. This guy's a physicist, a Rhodes Scholar. He looks at the system and sees billions, literally billions, being dumped into tech that's basically obsolete. And he's like, we need a serious upgrade.
Yeah, and that's where his background is so interesting, right? He got the whole tech thing, how fast it moves.
Yeah.
He'd seen firsthand how China was catching up 5G, AI, autonomous systems, the stuff that's going to be huge EE in future warfare.
Totally. So what's his solution? Shake things up. He creates DIUX, the Defense Innovation Unit, and plops it right in Silicon Valley.
Talk about a culture clash, right?
Right.
You've got the military folks. Some of them are wary of that whole Silicon Valley move fast and break things mentality. And then you got the tech folks looking at the Pentagon like, my ideas are going to vanish in that bureaucracy.
Black hole, right.
Exactly.
Total can't live with them, can't live without them situation. But this is where the book gets good, because it digs into those early days of struggles were real. Did you know DIUX almost got completely defunded right off the bat?
It's kind of funny in a way.
Right.
Like, hey, revolutionize the military. Okay, but we might not have an office next week. But it shows you how deep that skepticism ran.
Totally. It makes you wonder, how do you even start to bridge that kind of divide? Two totally different worlds.
It's more than just tech, though, right? It's trust. Finding common ground. Seeing the value each side brings.
Okay, so how did they start to build that trust?
Well, they needed some early wins, right? Like the tanker refueling app. They literally took that whiteboard system and turned it into an app.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Wow. And it's not just about the app, right? It's that they did it so fast, so efficiently. $1.5 million, less than 5 months to develop.
Yeah, unheard of in the government, right?
Yeah.
But it highlights this bigger problem, this valley of death they talk about in the book.
Right, you can have a brilliant idea, a prototype, but getting it from there to actually being used, whole different ballgame.
Totally, and that's where the Pentagon's usual way of doing things, all slow and risk-averse, clashes with how Silicon Valley works, all fast and agile.
Right. So enter Lauren Daly at DIUX, who basically says, enough with this. And she pushes through this new contracting system, the commercial solutions opening.
Total game changer. Let DIUX bypass some of that red tape and get stuff to the troops way faster.
Like finally hitting add to cart for the Pentagon.
Exactly.
So this need for speed, for agility, gets even more important when you look at what's going on with North Korea around this same time. The intelligence community is freaking out because North Korea is developing these mobile nuclear missiles that could hit the US and our existing spy satellites. Basically useless.
Yeah, those things were built for a different kind of enemy, not for these mobile launchers. Too slow, not flexible at all.
Right. And that's where you see the limits of relying just on those traditional big defense contractors. They weren't set up to handle this kind of threat that's constantly evolving.
Exactly.
And so DIUX steps up, says, we got this. They find this guy, Payam Banazadeh, who has this startup, Capella Space. They're using something called synthetic aperture radar. Basically, it's like getting these crazy clear pictures from space, no matter the weather, even in total darkness.
Like having X-ray vision to track those missile launchers, right?
Yeah.
And way cheaper than those old spy satellites.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker. DIUX gets pushback for this, even though the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is backing them up.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, some folks in the Pentagon saw this as like a threat to their own projects and their budgets.
So it's not even just about the tech, it's the whole internal politics of it all.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
DIUX was shaking things up, making people uncomfortable. And it wasn't just North Korea. They were at the forefront of bringing in all these other Silicon Valley innovations.
Right, like Palantir, the data analytics people, and Doral, with their crazy drone-killing tech, and of course, SpaceX, totally changing the space game.
They were showing everyone that you could be successful, profitable, and still help your country. It was a wake-up call for the traditional defense industry.
For sure. But now, let's talk about one of the most fascinating and kind of controversial projects from DIU's, Project Maven.
Right, artificial intelligence, right?
AI. They wanted to use it to analyze all that drone footage coming in from, like, Iraq, Afghanistan.
Mountains of data, overwhelming for any human to go through. Maven was supposed to use machine learning to spot threats faster, maybe save lives, make missions more effective, all that.
Okay, so AI analyzing drone footage, that's some sci-fi stuff right there. Kind of makes you wonder about machines making life or death calls on the battlefield.
No doubt. The IUX was pushing boundaries, not just with technology, but ethically too.
Right.
And this wasn't just theoretical. People at Google, they started raising concerns like, are we contributing to killer robots here? Is this right?
Yeah, it really makes you think about this new kind of warfare where it's not always clear where human judgment ends and algorithms begin. Heavy stuff.
It is. And it's a debate that's still going strong, as it should. But then, in the middle of all this, something happens that puts all these new technologies and strategies to the test. The war in Ukraine.
A real wake-up call for the world, seeing a conflict like that unfold in real time with everything moving so fast.
And what's been interesting is this rise of what some people are calling techno-guerrilla warfare. Ukrainians, civilians, soldiers, using everyday tech to incredible effect.
Yeah, like using apps to track enemy movements, share intel, even crowdfund for military equipment.
Amazing, right?
It really shows how tech is leveling the playing field. You don't need a massive military budget anymore to get your hands on some pretty advanced stuff.
Exactly. It all goes back to what we were saying about agility, right? The Ukrainians have been incredibly good at innovating, improvising, trying new things on the fly.
So how did the Pentagon react to all this? Seems like a big I told you so moment for the DIUX folks.
Oh, for sure. The war in Ukraine was like proof of concept for a lot of what they'd been saying.
Yeah.
But it also showed this big divide within the Pentagon itself.
Oh, interesting. So how so?
Well, you had the DIUX people saying, see, this is the future. We need more of this. But then you had others, some pretty high up, who downplayed it, said it wasn't that big a deal. They still believed in the old ways of doing things.
Wow. It's like some people get it, some people just don't.
It's this tension between embracing the new and clinging to what's familiar. And it's not just the Pentagon. It's everywhere.
It makes you wonder, what does this all mean for war in the future? And maybe even bigger, how do we bridge this gap between the tech world, which is all about speed, and the military, which can feel kind of slow?
Yeah, the authors talk about this idea of civil-military fusion, basically finding ways to reconnect those two worlds. It's not just about sharing tech, it's about building empathy, understanding.
Right, so they talk about expanding those ROTC programs to attract more tech people, making national service a bigger deal, even tackling immigration reform so we can get the best and brightest from everywhere.
All good ideas, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about bringing new people in, though. It's about changing how the Pentagon itself works. They say the military needs to think more like entrepreneurs, be more open to risk, reward people for new ideas.
Okay, I like that. So less bureaucracy, more let's try it and see.
Exactly. They even say instead of giving orders, the Pentagon should be placing orders. Be the customer, set the challenge, and let the private sector, with all its energy and creativity, figure out the solutions.
I mean, that makes sense, but I imagine there are some people who wouldn't like that very much.
Oh, for sure. The book doesn't shy away from that. They talk about how powerful the military-industrial complex is, how much they benefit from keeping things the same.
Right, and then there's just the whole bureaucracy itself. Big organizations, like change is hard.
Yeah, for sure. It's like trying to turn a giant ship. Takes time, takes effort. And let's not forget the politics of all this. Defense spending is huge, right?
Yeah.
Big decisions, lots of opinions, people fighting for their piece of the pie.
Right, even the best ideas can get lost in all that. But the authors, do they seem hopeful at all?
Yeah, there's always that risk, right?
Like, totally.
But they do have some optimism. They think change is as possible. But it'll take both sides really working at it.
Like they say, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, that's, well, we can't keep fighting tomorrow's battles with yesterday's tools.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We got to be ready for what's next, and that means being open to new ideas, new ways of doing things.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into Unit X, I'm left thinking, did DIUBs really succeed? I mean, did they actually bridge that gap between Silicon Valley and the Pentagon?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And I think the book gives us kind of a mixed answer.
Yeah.
They definitely had some big wins. The tanker refueling app, that whole Capella space thing, things that showed they could get stuff done, make a real impact.
Right. But they were definitely up against it the whole way, right?
Oh, yeah. Constant battles for funding, for support, for everything. It reminds me of that saying, the wheels of progress turn slowly.
So true.
Oh.
So where does that leave DIUX? Do we know?
Well, remember, the book came out last year, and back then, DIUX didn't have a permanent leader. Plus, new administration, maybe different priorities, who knows?
So their future was kind of up in the air.
Exactly. And it shows that change is never a sure thing. Even when you're doing good work, things can shift. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Well said. But even if DIUX didn't totally revolutionize the Pentagon overnight, they definitely shook things up, got people thinking differently.
For sure. They challenged the status quo, pushed boundaries, and showed that, hey, collaboration and innovation, those are powerful tools, especially when the world's changing so fast.
And those are lessons we can all use, right? Not just in the military, but everywhere.
Absolutely. It's about being open to new ideas, being willing to adapt. The world isn't going to wait for us to catch up. We got to stay ahead of the curve.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that's about all the time we have for our deep dive into Unit X, how the Pentagon and Silicon Valley can work together to win the wars of the future.
Great discussion.
This book really got us thinking about the future of warfare, the role of technology, and the importance of staying ahead of the curve. If you want to learn more, I definitely recommend checking it out. We'll be back next time with another deep dive, exploring a new topic, and hopefully sparking some more thought-provoking conversations. Until then, keep those brain cells firing.